Now, usually with any sport, you get through the regular season and it has its ebbs and flows in terms of the style of play, in terms of the quality of play, in terms of your actual interest level. But typically, once you get to the playoffs, that's where you find the intensity is ratcheted up, the interest, the intrigue is ratcheted up. And even if the regular season isn't all that great, you hope come playoff time that it's a start of a whole new season and that things will be different. And this is where you get to nut cutting time, the nitty gritty, and you hope things are going to be good. Well, clearly things haven't been good with the NBA playoffs this year. And I've been fortunate over the years to see a lot of great playoff series, a lot of great playoff seasons, if you will, and some not so good ones too. Some years are just going to be better than others. That is kind of the natural ebb and flow of things. Not every year can be great, not every year will be terrible. But as I sit here and watch this year's NBA playoffs, an overwhelming feeling comes over me that this has to be easily the worst NBA playoffs I have ever seen. All types of blowouts, very few competitive series of any real interest whatsoever. And even if they were interesting, they primarily revolved around a bunch of teams that you really didn't give a crap about, let's be honest. And even still, as of this recording, you have two teams in the Cavs and the Warriors that are undefeated in the playoffs so far, to the point where they're too dominant, perhaps, and that none of these other teams really matter and nobody else can really measure up. You just watch and you say, oh my God, this is terrible. It's like you've been waiting all year to get to the Cavs and the Warriors in the NBA Finals, and that's all that matters. And that's a shame. Now, how did it get so bad? I think you could look very closely at some obvious answers. Starting off with the Cavaliers, LeBron James is just too good. Nobody in the Eastern Conference can mess with LeBron and the Cavs as a whole. And the fact is, the Eastern Conference is pretty much as whack as it has been since Jordan retired. And you're talking about a long, long time where the Eastern Conference has been inadequate, has not measured up. And you can clearly see the talent gulf between the Cavaliers and everybody else in the Eastern Conference. And then you look at the Western Conference, the Golden State Warriors are just too good for everybody. And frankly, the Western Conference is a little bit weaker than it has been in previous years. The Western Conference is not as strong as it once has been. So even for those people that will always talk about how superior the West is, it sure doesn't look that superior this year. That's all I'm saying. You basically have, in a nutshell, two teams that are just too good for everybody else. And sometimes dominance can be cool, but sometimes dominance isn't cool, especially when you talk about the path to get to the inevitability of the Cavs and the Warriors in the NBA Finals for the third straight year. But I think those are the obvious answers. I think it's also important to look at some of the underlying issues, some of the root causes that have led to just the horrible basketball we frankly have seen in this year's NBA playoffs. I think a lot of it does go back to the one and done of the NBA. You get a lot of these kids that go to college not as a place to continue to grow their games and ply their craft and learn how to become basketball players, but guys that look at college as a 1 year pit stop where they can get some national TV exposure before they go to the NBA level. So what happens is in today's NBA, more often than not, it can take 2, 3, 4 years before you can get a lot of impact out of a lot of these high picks, including guys taken in the top 1, 2, or 3 of the draft. Where it used to be, you could see the entire fortunes of an organization change relatively quickly based off of taking a guy high. Like it felt good when you won the lottery because you could potentially get a franchise changer. Well, now in the NBA, you can still get those franchise changers, but those franchise changers might not come in and change things immediately. It may still take 2, 3, 4 years before they become the players that they were supposed to be. Whereas opposed to if they would have been drafted at 21, 22 years old, like it used to be coming out of college, these guys step in and they're ready to make an impact from day number one. And that trickle effect goes throughout the league. You have kids coming into the NBA that aren't as good as they used to be, that aren't as prepared as they used to be, and it takes years for them to become that type of player. And on top of that, now you're talking about 19, 20-year-old kids coming into the league. Not all of them are equipped to deal with the challenges of being a professional athlete, with all that money being thrown at you, all the privilege being thrown at you, all the entitlements that come with that. Not everybody can sit there and conduct themselves as a professional and be a professional, where it might have been easier in college, where basketball could be the deal and basketball was it, along with your classwork, depending on the school. You could sit there, and by the time you got to 21, 22 years of age, you had grown, you had matured, and you had an NBA-ready game. So often we look at these kids coming into the draft every year, and it's all about projection and potential, because the fact is their games are just not ready for the NBA. So even when these guys get to be star players, it feels like they're not the type of stars that you would have seen in previous years. And I think in part with the one-and-done mentality that we have in the draft, it really has led to a lack of emphasis on drafting and developing talent. Too many teams want to take the quick route to building a championship team, not even just a super team, but just trying to become a competitive, viable team, where they're trading away future picks for older players. They're paying big money to guys in free agency that have no business getting that type of money. And part of the flaw in all of this is you're trying to piece guys together that aren't as young as guys you could have drafted, and you lack continuity, you lack cohesiveness, you lack chemistry. Instead of trying to bring in players specifically to fit what you're trying to do, sometimes you're just trying to shoehorn guys in and hope that it figures out. And what really happens, again, is you get this lack of emphasis on drafting and developing talent. It's not that much of a surprise, especially in the NBA, that you could see a couple of teams really stay at the top for years, because that young influx of talent that could change the landscape of the NBA every few years just isn't happening. Then you look at the style of game itself and just the natural evolution over the years, and it hasn't been good. It's all about isolation and the three-point shot. Defense isn't nearly as good as it used to be. Just the offensive flow isn't as good as it used to be. It just leads to long stretches with all the isolation and a ball that's played and the three-point shot. It leads to long stretches where teams can struggle to score, and so on and so forth. But what you really get is a lack of physicality, which just comes again from a variety of different places. But when I watch the playoffs in different sports, I should be able to feel like this feels different. This feels more important. This feels special. When I watch Major League Baseball's playoffs, the playoffs feel different than the regular season. It feels more important. Everything matters. The NHL, clearly the Stanley Cup playoffs are a whole different level of intensity, even from the intensity of an NHL regular season. I look at the NFL, and I think to a degree you will see teams kind of tighten up a little bit. Things get a little more physical, you get played a little bit closer to the vest. You can see a difference in the NFL playoffs. Maybe not what you used to see, granted, but you still can see it. But the NBA, to me, there's absolutely no difference between the style of play of the regular season and the playoffs. So it's hard to get in that mindset of thinking this matters more, or this is do or die, or this is the most important thing in the world, if it feels absolutely no different than what I saw throughout the course of the 5-6 months of the regular season. And that lack of physicality, if it just doesn't seem like it matters as much, it's not going to matter to us as fans as much. And if it definitely seems like it doesn't matter to the players as much because of rule changes and all these other things, style of play, it just isn't going to matter. And then you look at the lack of mega star power too. I mean, it's something that's gotten a little bit better in the league in terms of the overall quality of star talent compared to maybe 10, 12 years ago. But you still have, to me, a real lack of megastars. Like LeBron James is a megastar and so much more. Steph Curry is a megastar. But you're looking at, like, the Spurs, Kawhi Leonard is a great player. Is he a megastar? No. Is Isaiah Thomas a great player for the Boston Celtics? Is he a megastar? No. You know, at the end of the day, star power matters. And when your league lacks star power, and in particular your playoffs lack that big-time star power, you know, you're watching the Eastern and Western Conference Finals, and it's LeBron James versus Isaiah Thomas. It's Stephen Curry and Kevin Durant against a Kawhi Leonard-less San Antonio Spurs team, a Tony Parker-less San Antonio Spurs team that no longer has Tim Duncan. What, you're going to get excited about Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Kevin Durant taking on LaMarcus Aldridge? I don't think so. And it is just evident to see how much, to me, this has impacted the enjoyability of the playoffs. And then when you look even deeper, it's, I think, part of the problem of everybody gets huge money in today's NBA. When you're in a place where Harrison Barnes gets max money, you're not in a good place. So to me, I think it impacts the desire of some of these guys to become better players, because why the hell would I want to become an all-star with all the pressures that come along with being an all-star, where I could just be a top-flight role player and get paid like I'm a megastar? The hierarchy of things in terms of pay and level of responsibility are all screwed up and all skew in the NBA. Everybody gets paid massive fucking money. So these guys don't have to work as hard to become the type of players they should potentially be, because they choose not to be, because they don't have to choose to be, because they're still going to get paid a shit ton of money. And if you paid everybody in your office 7 figures for doing a job that was worth maybe $50,000 a year, they wouldn't care how well they did their job or not, because everybody's getting paid a shit ton of money. There would be no incentive to improve. There would be no incentive to move up. There would be no incentive to take the next step in your career. Why? Because you wouldn't need to. Because you're going to get perfectly comfortable where the hell you are. And from a team building standpoint, this everybody gets huge money mentality has really, in my opinion, hurt the league, because it can really screw up rosters in terms of who you're able to keep or who you're not. And even if you are keeping them, you have a salary cap, but you don't really have a salary cap with bird right rules and so on and so forth. You got teams that can blow way over the salary cap to keep their talent, get into the luxury tax space, paying role players. Like, I look at the Cavaliers. They're paying Tristan Thompson $16 million, isn't it, a year? $16 million for Tristan Thompson. On top of the mega deals they're paying LeBron and Kyrie Irving and Kevin Love. They're paying J.R. Smith a shit ton of money. They're paying a ton of guys a shit ton of money. And now you've got role players that are basically getting massive money. So for teams that aren't the Cavs, teams that aren't the Warriors, it can become incredibly prohibitive to go out in the free agent market and get, let's say, quality role players, because those quality role players are commanding double-digit millions a year in salary. So now you're left getting the dregs of the mid-level exception and the veterans minimum and so on and so forth. And I think that has really hurt the league too, is the fact that most teams can afford to only pay a couple of guys, even though you have a salary cap, but certain teams can go way, way over. And it's just ridiculous. And then this emphasis on the super teams has, I think, really been the biggest killer of all. With the Celtics, and then LeBron, Wade, and Bosh in the Heat, and now LeBron, Kyrie, and Kevin Love in Cleveland. Then you look at the Warriors with Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Kevin Durant, Draymond Green. You have too much talent on a couple of these teams. It's this love of the super team that really, to me, started with the Boston Celtics in recent years, talking about that 08 team with Pierce Allen and Garnett. At least with that team, you could argue those were guys that had been in the league a long time, that were at a different place in their career, and they were willing to sacrifice and give up some for the greater good of the team. Now you're getting to a point where you've got a couple of teams that are just basically hoarding all of the talent in the league. It's no surprise that we're getting to this point where you only have a couple of teams that really matter. And that's basically what it is. You ultimately only have 2 teams that matter. You look at the way they were presented on television all year long. You know that only 2 teams matter. And frankly, that's because there are only 2 teams that matter. Because none of these other teams are even close in terms of talent, style of play, to the Cavs in the Eastern Conference or the Warriors in the Western Conference to being really viable, competitive options. It is not just a matter of LeBron is just so much better than everybody else. Part of that is LeBron is better than everybody else. The other part of it is his team around him is so vastly superior, and there is no star power in the Eastern Conference that can even come close to measuring up to LeBron James. It's not just about what LeBron James is. It's sometimes about what these other people aren't. And when you look at the Warriors in the Western Conference, you've got 4 All-Stars on one freaking team. How is that possibly good for the NBA? And when you look at the NBA right now, It feels like you're playing in an old NBA 2K Dynasty mode. This is what fans would be doing. They'd be sitting there and they'd be making these moves, and I'm going to go out and do this, and I'm going to get Kevin Durant in free agency, and I'm going to pair him with Curry and Clay and Draymond Green. I'm going to trade for Kevin Love, and I'm going to get back LeBron, and we've got Kyrie Irving here. We're going to go way over the salary cap to keep Tristan Thompson. Literally, the NBA has morphed into a place, to me, where they're doing video game dynasty shit. And eventually, when you're playing your video game dynasties, you get bored with the crap because you're too dominant and you kick everybody's ass by 50 points a night. That's pretty much the point we've gotten to with the NBA and the playoffs, is you've got two teams that are too damn good, especially compared to the rest of the crap in the league. And now you've gotten to a point for the fans where everybody knows what the reality is. And it's not so much the standpoint of you can't wait for the Cavs and the Warriors to play alone just because you can't wait to see the Cavs and Warriors play. You feel more like, what the hell is the point? Let's get on with it. I've been waiting all year to get to this inevitable finals matchup, and there's a difference in perspective. If fans feel like these are the only two teams that matter, then why would we take any of these other games seriously? And frankly, from a player's standpoint, these players on these other teams know the truth. They know who the two best teams are. They know how clearly superior the Warriors and the Cavs are. So at some point in time, that plays a bit of a role mentally, and eventually will lead to a decrease in quality of play for those teams trying to usurp and overtake the Cavaliers and the Warriors. Again, I'm sure there are big-time NBA fans that still love the playoffs, and bless you if you do. But this stuff has been shit, and this is the worst that I have ever seen it. This is not good. And you cannot possibly sell me on how a league's playoffs are any damn good if you don't give a flying crap about everything leading up to the NBA Finals, and nothing leading up to the NBA Finals is any damn good. How is this good for ratings? How is this going to please the advertisers? How is this going to please owners? I don't know that there is an easy answer here, because any changes that you might be able to implement are no guarantee of working. And even if they did, they could potentially take years to do so. But it is this emphasis on the super team that to me is really killing the NBA for me, and in particular the NBA playoffs. All these other teams paying max money to role players like Harrison Barnes. The style of play of isolation ball and over-reliance on the three-point shot. All these guys coming into the league and taking years to actually make a real impact. They all play a role. The lack of megastar power is another one. But it's really ultimately this emphasis on the super team and getting to a point where you only have two teams that feel like they're championship worthy. It's not a good place to be. And I know in the NBA, it's kind of how it plays out year in, year out. You only look at it maybe and saying there's somewhere between 4 to 6 teams that could potentially honestly win the NBA championship. That's not something that is unique to just this era. That goes back to Jordan's heyday. That goes back to Magic and Bird in the 80s. And before that, going back to the Celtics-Lakers days. You only ever feel like you have a few teams that could honestly, truly compete for an NBA championship. But now we're at a point where you only feel like 2 teams can compete for an NBA championship. And when you get to that point, nothing else really matters. And when you see the quality of play reflecting the fact that there are only 2 teams that are really championship caliber, it's not hard to understand, why these NBA playoffs are, in my mind, the worst that we have ever seen. We've got to get away from these super teams again. It's not an easy fix. It's not an easy answer. But I can't imagine going through another few years of this shit and expecting people to not tune out of the NBA. Because I know I'm getting close to that point, because, again, if all the regular season and all the playoffs are just a waste of time to get to the Cavaliers and the Warriors, why would I bother with anything else? And even when we got to that point, why the hell would I care about the NBA Finals?